Right, gentlemen, we're here as part of the RTV series of programs to discuss 4 books. The first of which is The African Caliphate, The Life, Works and Teachings of Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio by Ibrahim Suleiman. And just to get us going, and I'm presuming that we all know something about Sheikh Uthman, his career, in broad terms at least. So here's a quote that I hope will be enough to get the ball rolling. The quote is from the author in the introduction. He says, "Unbelief, iniquity and open defiance of Allah's laws had become the order of the day. The social system was immoral. Women were oppressed and, in the Sheikh's words, neglected like animals. There was unrestrained mixing of men and women. Cheating and fraud were rife. In the legal sphere, the Sharia had been subjected to significant alteration, and property laws were geared towards benefiting the rulers. Hausaland was at a critical stage in its history, needing a profound challenge to stir its conscience. Sheikh Uthman Dan Fodio was the man who emerged to lay down this challenge, to awaken the vast land to its religious and social responsibilities, and to provide an alternative political, moral and intellectual leadership." So who was this man, the Sheikh?
Well, what was interesting, I think, is the way that Sheikh Uthman really reassessed his Islam in the context within which he was, and from that assessment he drew out the solutions to his problem, and he changed the whole community.
Did he change his approach to his deen?
No, but what had happened is that the ulama of his time had they had come to an accommodation with this iniquitous situation,
Right.
and Sheikh Uthman didn't do that. So he really had to break. They felt that he broke radically with their tradition.
Right. He took a stand.
He took a stand.
Yeah.
And is that and you know, you see him especially in his pamphlets taking issues that people had, you know, almost forgotten, and going back in and pulling out the injunctions of Allah and applying them in a way that those people could understand in very, very simple language.
But the challenge must have been knowing which elements to bring out that would actually allow society or enable society to change.
What I found, or find, incredibly impressive about his work was the length of time he devoted, as you said earlier, to just teaching.
Well, it's tarbiyah, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's real tarbiyah.
Yeah.
It's real fostering the growth of something.
And producing, scholars, and other people who are able to, to maintain that transmission and so on. So, could it happen again?
Well, I think it begs the question of how does one make it happen again? Because as we were saying at the beginning, the situation that's described at the time when Sheikh Uthman had to go into action, so to speak, is a situation that we're all really familiar with from our everyday lives, and everybody is familiar with that. You know, the corruption and the social and moral corruption is the norm. So how do you bring about that kind of...
You're right. What's actually very exciting about it is that, in fact, it's so close to our own times, both in terms, not just the conditions, but in fact in terms of years. It's actually not that long ago.
The interesting thing is that it's so... you can see how timeless it is. The whole confrontation with the kufr of the time is timeless. But the thing, it's somehow we have to grasp the nature of it, of the confrontation as it is today, which most people haven't really grasped what it is.
So in his age then, if I'm not wrong then, is the immorality that you see in the quote, the corruption of the scholars of the deen had obviously fallen into a state of almost complete idol worship, and just general ignorance of the people and the neglect of the ordinary people and the women. In fact, it makes a very strong point of the treatment of the women. We haven't touched on the his deen, let's call it, the features of it, it was traditional. Because again, we're going back to the, as you say, late 18th, 19th century. So at a time when, for example, Wahhabism in the Hijaz was actually quite a force. And yet we have in West Africa this phenomenon taking place, which didn't seem to have that quite the same flavour.
You have interesting parallels, but the parallels are very fascinating, like the Ihya as-Sunnah, wa ikhmad al-bid'ah, the revivification of the Sunnah and the obliteration of bid'ah.
Yeah.
And there's such a different tone to it from the Wahhabi thing, because he has a foreword and he says, I'm not here to point the finger at people, because if you rend the veil over people, Allah will rend the veil over you and your wrong actions. So there's a very, very sweet nature to it. Whereas this thing we've got used to about bid'ah is pointing the finger at other people and disgracing them. And so it's fascinating. The parallels, in fact, with Wahhabism are fascinating. Because it's a very different approach altogether.
Before we come to the next book, I mean, the one more consideration, I suppose, that we might just spend a minute thinking about. Where ought we to be looking? What direction? Where are we expecting the next real sense of renewal to come from, given the state of things now amongst the Muslims?
I think it has to come out of the Western world in one way or another, because it's such a dominant force. That dominant Western culture. It's in Papua New Guinea. It's everywhere, and so in order to get back to Din al-Fitra, you've got to have some kind of antidote to that kind of all-pervading, monoculture of kufr and capitalism and consumerism and materialism and all of that's so far-reaching that I think that the contribution from the West, whether it's from indigenous Europeans who accept Islam, or whether it's from second and third generation immigrants, it really doesn't matter. But I think that the understanding of what has happened has to come out of a kind of Western context. Somehow, if you had the disease, you're more likely to have an antibody.
Yeah, people have become still in the West and not intoxicated as many people are about.
Well, I recognise among the Muslims now in the States and in Europe that there's a kind of desire for the kind of traditional Islam and exactly what Sheikh Uthman embodied. There's a kind of desire for that, even if people don't articulate it necessarily in that way by mentioning him by name. But I think there's a yearning for that, for the real thing. And if there's a yearning for it, then it will emerge.
What can certainly be said, Aaron, for the book is that, in fact, it's a manual. Looking at his life and the approach he took, the steps he took when he took them. I can't quite see it happening. Things happen the way they've always happened, don't they? Especially if you're looking at something like the renewal of the deen. It's not going to be 100 miles away from the original phenomenon with the Rasul and the companions.
Exactly, yeah.
So
there's always that element that's the strangers. Yeah. The strange thing is that it's the same pattern, but it's always the strangers.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. So we're looking for the strangers then.
In a way, yes.
Book Talk is sponsored by BahaPress.com. To receive an exclusive 10% discount on any purchase, enter the code RTV-discount01 when placing your order.